So thank you all for joining us for the third PatternShifts Affiliate Partners Professional Learning Community. Tonight we have Paul Kimmerling and Tim Carlson, who are going to be engaging us in several intriguing and interesting rounds of play. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you and take it away.
Excellent.
So Paul, should we put up the...
I am doing that as we speak.
Okay, well, obviously it's great to see you guys again, and we're excited to share this with you. This is actually how, just a slight story in the beginning, this is how Susan met us. We were at the Change Management Conference in Boston area, and she came to see the play presentation and came up to us afterwards and said, oh, let's talk to you more about it. And I think, Susan, you were thinking about one of your clients in Arizona, something about action learning projects is like maybe a front end to that. Is that correct? Is that the memory? Oh,
she's muted.
Okay.
Sorry. I think it's a great it's a great way to identify strategies and challenges within an organization, but from an action learning perspective, I think it's a phenomenal way to surface projects for groups to work on.
Right. So I just, like sort of move. So obviously Paul and I are both affiliate partner members. He and I have known each other for quite a few years and get in trouble in various places together. But this is one of our sort of collaborations. And if you go to sort of the next slide, Paul, which is really sort of the genesis of where this came from. So I'm going to take you back in a sort of moment in time. Are you advancing, Paulie?
The slide is up. Is the genesis of play? No?
Not on my screen.
It wouldn't be on your screen. It would be on my screen. I'm sharing my screen so all of you can see it, but that's not coming through?
No, we're still on the first slide.
Really? How fascinating. Okay, I'm sorry because...
well, it's a full moon, right? So, oh, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, weird. Sorry, guys. Didn't know.
No worries, Paul. So anyway, I'll take you to the real genesis of this, where play came from. So I was laying on a beach in Mexico, had probably too many margaritas over a period of time of being there. And I was reading this book a client had given me called Essentialism. Do you guys know that book? It's by Greg McKinnon. It's a really interesting book, and there's a lot of really cool parts of it, but basically one of the chapters was on play. And one of the things that was really interesting to me and fascinating to me was he was sort of lamenting the fact that play had been extracted from sort of many venues where he felt that was, it didn't make any sense. So one of them was obviously in traditional play for younger kids, et cetera, and this whole phenomenon around, sort of schools being very focused on testing and, and parents being very focused on resume building for their kids, starting at nursery school. And he was just saying that he thought it was really counter for a variety of reasons. And one of them was basically its effect, sort of the brain science around it, effect on executive function. And so he was talking about this, and he was also talking about how within corporations and businesses, organizations, that was also happening, and that actually was really counter to what would be beneficial of play. So what happened is I came back from that vacation and talked to Paul and said, hey, look, there's this really cool thing I'd like to explore. And so Paul jumped right on board, and we started researching play and play methodologies and, like what are the values of play, and just found like this groundswell around play and its benefits and, sort of what it activates, et cetera, et cetera. And that was sort of really the birth of play as a product. And then to sort of go back into sort of how we felt that this resonated for Paul and I was that we had been working in this, in and around this business, as we've talked about through the affiliate partners, for 30 plus years. And that we had been through strategic planning and organizational development exercises and sort of change initiatives and a bunch of different things, and felt like, wow, this really synced up with like what could be a really interesting and powerful tool to be able to sort of activate some of those activities in a way that was also something that was sort of on behalf of sort of a business outcome that was necessary. So we just saw a huge number of areas to explore. We sort of talked about, sort of what we were learning through the research process, and that one of the big things, of course, that continues to trend is this idea of innovation, and how organizations basically are, kind of run aground sometimes in this area. And that, the idea of people being creative, I worked for a company where I went in and people would just say, well, I'm not a creative person, I can't really do that. I'm like, basically that's nonsense. And so whether that's maybe your natural point of view or your thinking or how you see yourself, that, it's there, and in mass. And so part of it is about how to tap into that. So sort of like what's in the way of that. And then, part of what was also driving this was people are moving really, really fast. And so how does that, sort of that innovation and creativity sort of gene muscle help you in the fact that you need to move fast, but also you need to sort of continue to innovate, even if you're, a pretty young company. And certainly if you're maybe an old line company, it's really imperative that, you continue to look at this area. So the next slide, Mr. Paul,
is mine.
Is for...
So you guys may be thinking, well, that's great. But what about some science? And I want to share a story with you that Susan, I think we shared at the Lead Change Conference. This is a story that I took from Stuart Brown. He's a medical doctor, an author, and also the founder of the National Institute for Play. And he shared this story in a TED Talk, which was entitled "Play is More Than Just Fun." And the story he shared was about a meeting between a polar bear and a husky, which you see in this picture. Now, you may be able to see that the husky is chained. The polar bear is not. This is not a circus act, right? Now, here's the problem. The bear approaches the dog and basically gives him a stare that says, "I'm going to eat you." The dog, however, responds with a play posture, and it totally changes the dynamic of the interaction. The good news in this story is they had a great time together. The best news, the bear didn't eat the dog. Now, what is the lesson for human beings? We think that it's when we engage in play, we can change the course of our interactions, and we can be delightfully surprised by the results, kind of like the dog was. As we continue to look at this, what we learned from a study that we read in 2016 is that there are actually 3 ways that playfulness can lead to creativity. And they are, first, what we call positive affect, right? We all know from playing as adults, or especially from playing as kids, that play generates a very positive mood. It generates excitement, it generates appreciation, sometimes even joy. The second, which we all have been talking about at the affiliate partners events, is it creates psychological safety. And in case that is a foreign concept, which I don't think it is, but let me just say that it's a feeling that I belong and that I can trust the people I'm with, so that when I contribute ideas, I do it freely and without the fear that I will be evaluated or judged by team members or others. And the last is intrinsic motivation. So no one has to make you play. It's like, oh, let's go play. Everyone's like, yes, let's do that, right? Unless you're the Grinch, which is seasonally appropriate. But so play is something that generally folks want to do without having to be prodded. So that's some background that we have looked at for this. So Tim.
So I'm touched on some of these things in my opening, but basically what we started to discover is the sort of motivations for using play as a tool, as a product within sort of the mix. And Paul touched on some of them, and I touched on some of them as I sort of did the opening. So one is the CEO of the brain, which I found this fascinating, and just in terms of increasing decision-making, problem solving, flexibility, delegation, time management, planning, and execution. And obviously all of us who are working in the leadership realm or the manager realm, who doesn't want to be able to increase capacity in these areas? This is also something, Paul and I are working on stuff, sort of a leadership program right now called Leader Care, which is really how do leaders sort of take care of themselves and the people that work for them, especially under the circumstances of the pandemic. So it's, both about stress behaviors and about sort of how to do that, but obviously what are the particulars of this moment in time that are really hard on leaders. And so this is another, sort of way these skills being there in the mix, having more capacity in them, is going to benefit you in this time as well. So we thought it was really interesting. I mean, this was done before we ran into the pandemic, but it's actually, I think, even more relevant now. Something Paul touched on, sort of the encouraging the balanced participation. So a lot of these exercises can be sort of feel really risky and maybe adversarial and sort of, I don't really want to talk about these things. Or so what we're trying to do obviously is break down some of those boundaries, and also to sort of get sort of the sense of both a shared experience, but also a sort of a shared, being able to connect the dots between different groups. So an alignment piece of it. And then the idea of the curiosity and discovery. So, step out of the day-to-day grind, which is one of the things that I think a lot of people have problems with, to get that distance, to get that objectivity, but also to be able to feel like you have license. And these are all things that I think were part of our motivation. And then in terms of some of the results that we get from that. So alignment. This is where you start to surface things like, I didn't know that, or never heard that. And we'll talk about that a little bit within the reference point of the game, which is a discovery tool that Paul and I created. Certainly that's a part of it. So you're trying to surface those disconnects. Paul and I also talk about how in this product that you actually get sort of this sense of belonging, camaraderie, this team building piece of it. So as we say, you get sort of organizational development for free by going through with what is typically a strategic exercise, if you will. Basically an understanding of the experiences that are out there and sort of understanding the organizational landscape. So part of what comes out of this process is basically kind of an organizational sort of mind map. And then obviously the ultimate thing is to come up with new and innovative solutions. So how do we go and get people to sort of get out of their box, if you will, but also to sort of think of that on behalf of specific business issues or challenges that might be going in the organization. And so the next slide talks about some of what might be some of those things that are challenging the organization. And Paul's going to take you through a little exercise to inform our game today.
Exactly.
Yes.
So there are two reasons to show you this slide. One is because we just want to run down some scenarios that may prompt organizations to look for new solutions or to use the play process to unearth what's working and what isn't. But the other reason I want to show you this list is because we want to come to a consensus among the folks here about a particular topic that we will use against which to play the game. Here's why I say that. Usually, if we were doing this at an organization, there is a presenting problem, right? Or a challenge that they are trying to address. Now, all of us come from different places when we come here tonight, and most of us come from a consultant viewpoint, meaning we work on behalf of other organizations. So we're not the typical crowd in a way, but that's why we love us. So what I'm going to do is run down this list and ask you to tell me what your top item is by using the number, so that we can get a consensus around which issue we'd like to play the game in order to uncover what may be driving this particular issue. Does that make sense?
The only thing I want to add to what Paul has said is that, so we have a document that we've created, which is actually forwards a bunch of other additional ones. So we thought, well, these are ones that might be most likely that people would be looking at. This process of play could also be solving or trying to solve for multiple dynamics that are going on. Because I think a lot of the things that are in the way for around one of the dynamics or one of the sort of business challenges would be in the way around solving multiple business challenges. So these are just some of them.
Okay. So as we look at these, number one is the situation may be that an organization is trying to grow and or expand into new markets, or perhaps improve their presence in existing markets. The second one around cultural change could be many things, including trying to outgrow existing company legacy that is really working against the organization, or attempting to refresh or re-energize existing teams. The third is a strong belief that given the conditions in the world today, or the competition that is facing organizations, that there needs to be some serious change, or it will go in a very difficult direction. Like could die sounds dire, doesn't it? Sorry.
Mhm.
We just love
death spiral.
We just love scaring people. Number four is that as you look at your organization internally, you realize that you have trouble either generating innovative ideas and or developing or focusing them such that new product does not get to market, right? And the fifth is that in a general way, you know that your creative and innovation muscle is not enough to get you where you need to be for the next X number of years. So we know that all of you are thinking about this probably in terms of clients that you work with. Totally fair, right? And so I'm curious whether any of you feel a strong pull toward one of these five, one or more, and we could sort of assess which one we would use as our focus for the game.
I like number 5.
So we have
Do we have the client in mind when we're thinking about this? Or
Yeah, because as Paul said, one of the things that we typically play this with either senior leadership teams. It could be a functional team like marketing and finance or technology, or it could be a project team. So usually everybody's in the same organization.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore there is sort of more of a sense of like, this is the thing we want to like try to, really dig into or knock off the list. So now for you guys, because you have your own practice areas and also have, various places that you show up, speaking to those places with some sort of a knowledge. I think, Susan, when we were at the Change Conference, would you agree that a lot of the people there were really speaking on behalf of their client organizations? Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's kind of the frame of mind I went into as I read it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, number 2, I think the cultural change piece
Okay.
is a good one.
I would say 4.
Troublemaker.
But no, 2 or 5 is good.
Yeah, I'm fine with any of them.
Yeah, they're all relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, as
Okay,
I
pick
said, I
one.
think a lot of these things, if you solve for one, you solve for many. So, I mean, there are some things on the list, the larger list, that are not like these. But I think Paul and I picked these because it was everything from sort of a traditional new market piece to cultural change to, sort of we can't get anything at the door in time. So these are problems that we've run into in our practice, which I think is why we felt like it would resonate with people.
I think number 5 is the most nuanced. So
Okay.
for fun tonight, since it's about play, let's
do number 5.
I like thinking.
Let me ask Herb. So Herb, are you thinking about this from a client perspective or from your organization perspective?
Actually, a little of both.
Okay.
But I think 5 is good. I think they're all good.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Well, I'm glad I don't have to start shouting like count all the votes or like or strong arm the governor of Georgia or something.
Well, I don't want to leave that off the table. I mean, if we have,
Jeez, guys.
yeah.
I think it was stop the vote first. And then
Oh, sorry. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
There are so many memorable quotes this year.
Let's just lock them all up and stop the vote. And we get multiple things hit.
So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen and we will go to the game. Does that sound right, Tim?
So I'm going to shift the perspective now from, everyone looking down on me. Hello. To something where I'm going to show you the game board. So what we wanted to do, I think, I don't know, this kind of goes without saying. So traditional, or in the original design, obviously, is to be done in person. like all of this stuff, obviously that's not really easy to do. So Paul and I made a virtual version of it. So we're trying to make it as real as possible in terms of what that experience might be if you were here actually like rolling the dice and going the game board. So I'm going to describe some of the attributes of the game. And again, this is one piece of the product. So this is just a way to sort of engage people in this discovery and this sort of mapping process, which Paul is going to be our master sort of mapper of what people are saying in terms of answering some of these questions. But as we go through the game, I think you'll understand more about how it could unfold, and actually might even be able to place, people that you work with or projects that you've worked on sort of in this metaphor. And I think it's, so we'll sort of also answer questions as we go along. So obviously, typically we would just be having the participants answer questions, but since this is also something where it might be a interesting product or tool for you guys to use, we want to, answer those questions if things come up for you. So feel free to just sort of say, I have a question about this. Okay, so I'm going to now attempt a elegant camera pan onto the game board. See how we do. Hold on a second.
Dun, 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 dun.
Thank you for the sonic effect, David. I appreciate that. Ooh. Dun, 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 dun.
Wow.
That's not bad, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Play the
So-
final frontier.
Okay,
Up just a little bit more so we can see the whole game board.
okay, hold on a second. I'm going to move something here. So one moment, please. Okay, so now I can see my full screen so I can see the nuance. Okay, so I'll be here. I'm sort of tonight, I'm a combination of Alex Trebek and Vanna White. I just want to put that out there. I have many roles. So what I'm going to do is just take you through this. So what happens is that we give each of our participants, and since we weren't really sure who was going to show up or not, everybody would have an actual customized game piece. So right now we have our generic silhouetted head just to represent the individual players, but we would use this to make it very real and customized. So everybody who's playing the game would have their own game piece. Everybody begins here in the first part of it. And then it's really sort of straightforward. So people roll the dice one at a time, take their number, okay, number 5. They would advance their game piece to number 5. And what it does is it's a series of stack of questions at each of the locations. And what we've done in terms of the locations and where this kind of came from very quickly is Paul and I felt by exploring these various areas of the organization and the work, that this is how you get that picture. So things like the first section, which is about, we call it the land of boulders, but really it's about what's in the way. Are they small, medium, large? What do we need to do to get rid of them, et cetera, et cetera. Once upon a time, Paul kind of touched on, which is the lore. Things like, oh, well, we don't do that, or we've never done that before, and et cetera, et cetera. And then as you move along the board, there's a bunch of different things around sort of the data that exists, how do you make decisions, where do your ideas go? Often people say to us, oh, well, I don't know what happens to all these ideas, but they kind of go into never land. So we call it the idea ravine. Gold mine is basically what kind of IP secret sauce the organizations have. The U-Rock is about recognition. And we definitely feel like, and I think all of the people in the room would say that a lot of how people are rewarded and recognized helps to activate a particular type of action and behavior. The grid is about how I share ideas. Black hole is when things go into that magic black hole, like it just disappears into it. And like, why does it go there, et cetera, et cetera. And then the danger zone are sort of like repeat patterns that we have. Like, so every time we get to this particular step in a process, it goes awry. So that's the danger zone in an organization. And the wild cards are really a fun series of a little random things that are still about the organization and about some of the people you might be working with, to try to have a little fun with it, but also to tease out some other ways in which people get sort of acknowledged, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so those are the sections. So this is not something where Paul and I kind of keenly call this sort of corporate candy land, but really it's when you roll the dice, you're just going to the actual stop. You're not going in a progression so that you end up at the end after X number of moves. It's just that you just, whatever the dice say, you go to that location. And then Paul and I have dubbed the goal that you're after is the land of unicorns and rainbows. So again, trying to have a little fun with it. And that's really sort of what is that end game? And that's the thing that Paul was talking about, which is what is the, the outcome or the challenge area that you're looking at. So our game tonight is about picking sort of the innovation creativity muscle, the building of that, and trying to drive towards that. And how does that look? So we'll play the game based on that. So, so David, let's say you were the first person. I'm going to volunteer you to be the first roll the dice.
Okay.
Roll the dice. The number shall be 6. We'd advance David to 6, and then David to draw a card. It's a question, and the question reads, is there a place in your organization where ideas can get trapped or go to wither and die? If so, describe it. David?
Finance and HR.
Very succinct. I like that. Okay, so as we go through, I'm going to do a little commentary at the same time. So HR and finance. So what Paul and I would be doing in the facilitation process, or whoever is facilitating it, would be potentially probing on some of that, or inviting other people in to potentially also answer that question. The goal here is really to sort of have a certain kind of conversation. Okay, so David, when you sort of say HR and finance, so tell me a couple of your experience, like why do you feel like those two particular places? I mean, you're quick to answer the question, which is great, but tell me more.
Well, usually when we're trying to do something big or make a change, you have to go through different approvals. And usually when it gets there, it ends up being like the black hole, or it takes the longest time. And it kind of is the embodiment of bureaucracy in most organizations, I think.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's cool. All right, so I'm gonna so we can have a little more experience with the game. So Susan, I'm gonna roll for you. Is that cool?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so when you're facilitating this live, you'd be posting all of these responses into these categories on a whiteboard, right?
So let me show you.
Yes. Actually, Paul's gonna.
Cool.
Paul is our.
What I am doing, so that you know where this stuff lives. Give me a moment, and I will share my screen. So we're using an app that you may know called Miro, M-I-R-O.
Don't know that one, but now I do.
Okay. Which allows you, and I'm not sure why this guy is in the way, I'm sorry, which allows you to set up any number of different templates. So I've got the icons that are the same icons as on the game board. You may see that here. And I've got Post-it notes underneath. And I believe David landed on the idea ravine, right? So here you see, and I'll just expand it. He said ideas die in HR and finance. HR and finance mean bureaucracy.
Nice.
Okay. And
Cool.
so what I am doing behind the scenes, although we would typically toggle back and forth, is I am recording all these things in real time. And the purpose of doing this, A, is to make sure we hear you, but 2, because Tim and I use this as data that we then synthesize and present back to an organization about, for example, where are some of the stumbling blocks, right? And what are some recommendations about how to address those? So if we learn through playing this, I'll just give you an example, that others of you chime in and say more about HR and finance, or mention other departments where things go to die, that gives us a set of data. We may also ask other questions to give us a richer set of data about that we can then put into our analysis. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions, folks, on what I'm doing here?
I
So
think that's pretty cool. I had not seen this this platform before, so that's really cool.
And the thing I think that you experienced, Susan, when we were at the conference, so we had the physical headers that were there. It is something, as we said, is sort of more in person, is a little more active, because you're kind of moving and adding to the map, if you will.
Right.
So this is our version of, trying to obviously facilitate between two people, where Paul and I also might be asking some probing questions, whether it's something Paul hears or it's something that I hear. And at the same time, it's, there's a scribe component of it. But, I think it's actually a pretty cool tool, actually.
Okay, great.
Okay. So Susan, may I roll for you?
Sure.
Okay. So Susan rolls another 6. Okay. So she's also in the idea ravine. All right. So let me pull Susan's question. Susan, how do ideas end up in the ravine? Pushed, dumped, or slip?
So I think they get dumped
Okay.
because I think there's only so much time and energy that people have.
Mhm.
And there's also, I think, sometimes a lack of communication where someone thinks that someone else is handling it. And so they sort of lob it over, but it never gets caught and picked up.
Okay.
So I think I don't, to me, slip is, sort of an unintentional accident, but
Right.
the drop is more, there's something missing that causes it to drop.
And that's interesting. So David, when you talk about sort of the places that ideas go to, the ravine where they go to, would some of the things that Susan's talking about around sort of her take on the of the 3 things that she was asking her question, would you say that is also your experience with the finance and HR piece, the push, dump, or slipped piece?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what we're talking about. There's a saying that I have in my family. I have no idea where we got this, but like my sister and I always say it back and forth. When there's an idea, like say this Thanksgiving, we all wanted to go for a bike ride. My sister said, we need a champion. And so like there always has to be that champion to make sure that goes all the way through, that will reach out and talk to those people, make sure it doesn't become a bureaucracy. So you need someone to follow that process through.
Right. But when you find something goes into that HR, finance thing, do you feel like there is the same dumping activities as opposed to like the slipping, which tends to be, as I would agree with Susan's, unintentionalness, as opposed to somebody pushing it in there?
Yeah, just a difference in priorities,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Thank you. All right. So Herb, Paul, do you have that, Mr. Paul?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So is this something, did we want to go and share the takeaways, Paul, in these things, or do we want to wait?
I'm happy to do that.
I think one of the things that we want to do at some point, and again, this is a little bit different because if they were on the wall, you'd be seeing them, is to also confirm understanding. So when people, in terms of taking that information down, it's a little harder. So
for example, what we have here, from what I've heard, is that ideas die in HR and finance, that HR and finance represent bureaucracy. They also have different priorities. And what Susan mentioned was that ideas get dumped due to lack of time or get dropped because one person thinks someone else is doing it.
interesting.
And then the idea that it's really helpful to have a champion, right? To take ownership and really run with this thing, whatever it is.
Right. Okay.
Did I capture that correctly, everybody?
Yeah, you did. Because I think, everybody's got great ideas, but when it goes to doing something with them, that's where they get stuck in that ravine.
Right.
Yeah.
What's interesting is it's a non-linear game, but it's because we both rolled the same thing, but you're starting to see a linear thought process here.
Right.
And I think what you will do, David, is you answer more questions. I mean, we have 10 to 12 questions per landing spot, because we figure there's going to be teams that will be playing. Could be 6 people, could be 10 people, whatever. But really, we feel like, and we've done some testing around this, that as you go through, if you go through the questions, you really have dug into that section, and you do start to see alignment pieces, or quite honestly, and I have some stories about this, a lack of alignment or a lack of connection in things that actually surprise people. So like you could be answering these things as an example. David could say, finance, HR, and you went right to it. And then somebody else could answer that, if I said to someone else, so where do you think those go? What do you think is that sort of place that's the ravine? Somebody else could say, I can't get anything through the technology people. I can't get product changes. I can't get updates to things. I can't get them to make fixes in the software. blah, blah, blah. And I have, the client comes up with all these great ideas and basically they don't want to do anything with them, which again goes back to sort of prioritization thing, but it's a very interesting sort of take because it could be, depending on who's in the room on this session, you might, have a different voice. So I love this stuff because I think it's actually really interesting. Okay, Herb, may I roll for you?
What's that?
Can I roll for you?
Oh, absolutely.
You're up next. If you get a 6, there's something here we should all play 6s.
Did you get a 6 too? That must be the theme for the night.
I feel like the dice are loaded or something. I don't know what happened. It's like weird. But I think this will be helpful because it kind of shows you also the progression of things. Okay, so your question. Give some examples of things that have ended up in the ravine.
Well, I think we're going reverse on what we've already answered, but obviously I think certain ideas and creativity end up in the ravine.
Okay.
And I guess you look at it from a company perspective as opposed to a client perspective. You could look at it as proposals and partnerships can end up in the ravine. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right, and it would be.
And sometimes the ravine's a good spot.
No, actually, the ravine doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't have been pushed into the ravine. So that's actually, you bring up a very good point. It's not necessarily that there isn't a rationale behind it, and we sacrificed it to the ravine for the right reasons, but that it did go there. So, and I think some people, when they answer this question, also, again, back to specific company, sort of common experience, it's like, oh, here's an example of an idea that went to the ravine. We were going to do blah, 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 and this went to the ravine. And that can also foster conversations like, why do you think it went to the ravine? And kind of back to what you said, which is maybe it should have gone to the ravine. Maybe that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, again, you guys were, talking about it's one thing to have an idea, it's one thing to be able to implement it and execute it. And I think there's a lot that goes into that in the sense of how easy or difficult is it to implement, right? So, and then this informal calculation of if it's going to be that difficult and take that long, what does that take out of the idea? So you got to, is the idea now worth that investment of time and effort, right? So it's always there's always that I call it like an informal calculation, right?
Yes, it's a calculus thing, right? What's the calculus behind the idea?
Yeah, it's
I think that's a great point, Herb. Because as you were talking, I was sort of visualizing like what needs to happen to get something over the ravine, like how it has to have momentum. People have to be engaged around it, right? And so the things that don't have that momentum can't make it across the ravine. They get stuck in it, right? And that may or may not be a bad thing.
yeah. Well, I think you gotta. I think I get stuck in the calculus aspect of it, but I think you have to have some sort of vision of what the implementation looks like, what the end game looks like, and how idea becomes reality, and what does day one and week one of reality look like. Otherwise everyone ends up spinning their wheels over something that seemed like a good idea. It's,
Exactly. Yeah.
and
I think
that's
it also goes back to what David said, which is that sometimes it's just missing a champion.
yeah.
It kind of got said sometime and people are like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And then, or that's a really great idea. And then it's like, ooh, and
no
then
one
you're
wants to
kind of
take
on
it.
to the next thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely how it can happen pretty easily. So it's
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's why I like to delegate as soon as somebody comes up with an idea and I say, wow, that's a great idea. Why don't you go do that?
Mhm.
Because then you learn, like, how committed are they? How excited are they about it? Can they engage other people around it? Do they really want to make it happen, or were they just throwing out ideas?
But I think that's something that is, interesting to sort of probe in organizations. I think the other thing that Paul and I have talked about is there a mechanism?
Yeah.
So part of it is, is kind of, you're speaking a little bit to this idea of a mechanism behind what you're doing with the idea. So you're saying delegate it, give it to somebody, said, do you want to run with it? We've actually talked about like incubator functions within organizations. And so there is a natural place to go. So maybe there's an initial vetting that happens, and then you sort of send it along into the incubator, right?
Right.
So that's all stuff that can come out. And again, back to Paul's comment about making recommendations, we might make that recommendation. Hey, sounds like you have lots of great ideas. They kind of don't really get steam. We feel like they're missing, part of the incubation process is to put a champion in it, or somebody who's really got passion around it. But there has to be maybe a more formal incubation process that's in the organization. So, that could be a recommendation. Okay, David, I think you're up, and I swear I'm not going to roll a 6.
You better not. I'm out of sticky notes.
Keep rolling 6s. We need to go take those dice and gamble.
Okay,
Yeah.
a 10. All right. Actually, there's only 3 of you, so I'll move. So anyway, to 10. All right, so 10 is black hole. So David, here's your black hole question. Do you feel that the organization has a black hole phenomenon?
Noticing a theme here.
Yeah. These two are similar.
There are some. But black holes doesn't necessarily need to be about ideas. It doesn't need to be about like finance or HR, but it could be. It could manifest itself in a lot of different ways in what people think of as a black hole.
So you're leaving that open to interpretation?
Yes, because the interpretation is sometimes the most fascinating part.
Yeah.
It's like, tell me about your mother. My mother? Oh, not you, David. Sorry. Sorry, not you.
Partner in a consulting firm. Hot dog.
No, I'm thinking black hole. I guess the idea just that popped up is how, companies can just talk the talk, but never walk the walk. And so it just feels like a black hole where it's like, yeah, we can say these. And I think people become jaded by so many new, I guess, moves to innovate or moves to change the culture. But sometimes if you don't move people at the top or really have big changes, it just kind of feels repetitive. So that's what instantly popped in my head.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, sometimes the things that naturally happen in your brain, it's actually, that's good.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think laterally here because I wanted to go back to the ravine and kind of talk about, just functional type things. But
yeah,
Sure. So I'm curious, David, if I could follow up with a question. It sounds as if you're saying, but I want to check my own sense of this, that novel ideas or processes or other things that are promulgated may sort of rise like a firecracker and then crackle out into the darkness, never to be heard from again. That sounds to me like where you're going, but.
Well, the specific idea I had in my head was when a new leader comes in to take over and they want to come change everything. We're going to be number one,
exactly,
5-star, like we're going all the way. And then with, you can say all you want up at top, but until you really change things downstream.
Yeah.
Really
it's funny because we were talking about this actually. I can't remember. I literally just having this conversation because that's what I was hearing, Dave, when you were saying that was this idea of actually showing up a particular way. And you go and you sort of present, we're going to be the best. This is going to be there's sort of a rah component, but then they don't actually show up that way. So people are kind of let down. I think you used the word, people are disappointed or let down, or I think it's kind of just bull, basically. Right.
Right. It's like, here's the next guy,
Right.
Well, go through the motions, but this won't last more than 6 months.
Right.
Got it.
So his name is Larry. The last one was Phil.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And
So
they
they are
both wear
one and the same
funky
person.
socks.
Right.
Right.
Right. Which is actually something that's interesting that also in terms of being able to dig into it based on what you just said. So if there is that phenomenon, so for you in the organization, the black hole is there's lots of people who come in the leadership positions. They say a certain thing. They try to get the troops revved up. They say what seems like all the right things, and then basically they don't really show up that way. And the next person comes in, and it kind of seems like the same thing happens. So that's the question then to me is it a function of the people that are being picked, the organizational dynamics that push you towards the black hole? You know, kind of what's the cause and effect relationship in some of those things?
That's a good question, because I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think that initial jump, that initial spark is usually uninformed because they want to make a big splash coming in without really understanding all the forces at play. But then also for something to actually really have a sea change, you know, everybody has to believe in it. And so you have to keep that sustained belief. And so to a certain extent, I don't know, suspension of disbelief comes to mind. You know, it's the theater term where you just kind of have to put your disbelief aside and go with it and see if it works or not. And that also doesn't often happen. So it's two parts.
It's interesting. Okay. All right. Susan, may I roll for you?
Yes, please. Not a 10 though.
How about a 6?
Yeah, that was a
What
tough
don't
one.
you want to tell us, Susan? Wait a minute.
Oh, you guys know. Wow, fancy. So you move to the wild cards.
Ooh, I like wild cards.
I know wild cards are fun. Okay, this one's a fun one too. Magic wand. If you could wave this wand to make anything happen, what would it be?
Oh, see, that's a Meg question. Meg should be here.
Okay,
All
well,
right.
we can send it to her. Babe, we need to answer this question.
So, so Herb will understand my response to this one. If I could make,
magic wands.
what was that?
I'm an authority on magic wands. Here we go.
Wow.
If I
Did you
could
go to
make-
Magic wand
Hogwarts?
professional.
If I could make
Awesome.
anything happen with a magic wand, I would want, how do I say this? I would want clients to have a really clear understanding of what is involved with something that they're asking for, so that they understand the value of the solution being provided and not try to minimize that value to keep their costs down. I mean, I understand why organizations want to keep their costs down, and I fully respect that, but I think that there's you know, asking for the moon and the stars but wanting to pay for the dirt on the road is kind of, you know.
I need to use it. Can I borrow that, Susan? I might have to steal that, actually. Don't worry, I'll put your name to it. It's okay. A very wise colleague of mine said the following, and it's so perfect.
Well, because, you know, they recognize the value. You know, they're smart. They're you know, they get it. They know, they see the value, but they play the card of not wanting to contribute, you know, and be a good partner with that.
Right. Okay. So what I'm hearing is somebody who is aligned between the sort of the commitment and maybe resources, et cetera, and the sort of the extent of the outcome they're looking for.
Right.
Right. So the dirt versus the moon and the stars, which I love. So as I said, I will steal that.
Go right ahead.
Okay. I will do that.
I think we should take the wand away from Susan, though, because if you did have that happen, you wouldn't get paid for anything, because like what you're so good at is letting them realize that.
Well, but it's getting to the point where they say yes, right? I mean, once you get in and you start working with them, they recognize the value and they see why you proposed what you did and why you're working with them the way you're working with them. But I think it's getting over that initial hump of getting them to see that if they were to invest maybe a little bit more upfront, they would get greater value on the back end
Right.
versus trying to compare, you know, apples to oranges in their proposal.
Got it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the magic wand, just as a metaphor, is, you know, I feel personally, and I think, Paul, you probably as well, we've sort of used this metaphor to sort of suggest two perspectives. One is our perspective, kind of what you're talking about, Susan. This is my perspective. And if I had a magic wand for your organization, this is what I would be looking for. And also to ask that leader to sort of step out of themselves for a second and feel like it's possible. So like it takes you into the sort of weird, you know, sort of mystical place. But, you know, sometimes people like, you know, the follow-up to is, okay, if I had a magic wand, I would do X, Y, and Z. And then you say, why do you feel like you don't have a magic wand in this place?
Yeah, that's
It's
a great
sort of
question.
you know, it sort of pushes in a particular way. So actually, were you saying something, David? You look at,
No, I was just saying
you're just freezing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Herb, may I?
Absolutely.
Okay. So 5. Okay. So Herb has moved to the way station. And as we talked about, this is about how people make decisions within organizations. So in terms of back to some of the things we were talking about earlier around how do things get prioritized, how things get decided, et cetera. It's how to, you know, so there is some interconnection to it. But Herb, your question is, how are priorities or level of importance currently determined for a project or an initiative? Would you like me to read it again?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, but just that'll help.
Yeah, okay. So how are priorities or level of importance currently determined for a project or an initiative?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, geez, due to our size, I think a lot of that comes on me.
So we'll just put Herb.
Well, it's really funny.
I just did.
It really comes down to what your, and you can break it into chunks, but what is your yearly strategic plan look like, right?
Right.
And I think that is a guide, which, by the way, it's December 1st, and I've only just begun our 21, but it's, I mean, it's a small crowd tonight, I can say that. So, but no, it really comes down to your strategic plan, and that's your guide, isn't it? To how do you make any determination on, you know, you go back to what your priorities and goals are for the year and how that all ties in.
Right.
You know, you can also break that down into again, there's an element of that fits into sales qualification, right? Does this opportunity fit into, how does this opportunity get prioritized, or should it get prioritized, and does that go into the ravine, right? We had you know, and I don't want to get too salesy, but we had a blind RFP come in the last couple of days from a company that we've serviced indirectly twice. And, you know, they're talking about needs in China and Japan. And we're like, this isn't going to go anywhere. What's the point, right? So anyway, I'm babbling a little bit, but I think that's really what it comes down to is I think it's hard to have, I know people talk about 3-year plans and 5-year plans. And I think to a certain extent that's okay. But I think making sure you have one at a time, 1 year at a time is essential. And I think, you know, we think it takes, you know, for us, we're nimble enough, we can deviate from any plan. But I think that also invites chaos. So I think it really comes down to, you know, as you look at the year, what are you trying to accomplish in the year? And obviously you have your revenues, you have this, you have your strategic initiatives, you have your marketing initiatives that all tie into that. How does that get determined? It gets determined by what's in your plan.
Right.
At least the weight is put on the plan. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's how I.
Well, part of the question is a little bit about the prioritization as opposed to the fact that these are projects. So I'll give you an example. Yeah, my husband used to work for a company, Investors Bank and Trust. Every year they would go through a process of coming up with their top 10 projects. So they identified, here's the top 10 projects, and to your point, Herb, you know, towards a strategic goal. Here's the top 10 projects that we're going to focus the company on. We're not doing any more than 10. That's it. And, you know, it was like a game of, I don't know, it's almost like a not a gambling game, but sort of, you know, trading. And so the idea was to go and say the organization only has so much capacity, and we need to figure out, because there are a lot of things that are probably weren't supporting them and or pursuing them. However, we have a finite sort of world. So it was like sort of this horse trading quality of things that they sort of came to the top 10. Now, to be fair, by the end of the first week, there was all of a sudden a top 13.
Sure.
and
that's fun.
And then a top 15, and it kind of defeated the purposes because there was no more resources than there was when you came up with 10. So it was sort of a flawed exercise, but they did try it. Right?
Well, was the top 10 projects geared towards, like, coming from, this is what our priorities are, this is what we need to accomplish in order to get there. These are the projects we see that we need to undertake to get that.
Right. Well, that's where it started, but everybody had as an example, everybody had their list. So this person said, these are the things that I think are the top priorities that we need to be working on, and then turn to their colleague and say, don't you agree? And they say, well, actually, no, here's the top 10 things I think we need to be working on. Now, they all were for the business. It wasn't like, we need, yellow pencil sharpeners. But it was something where they all had value. Like it's, so there's a portion of it where they were trying to rationalize the application of their resources. And it was just sort of an interesting, and I think different companies do it different ways. Some people have like scorecards, et cetera. So anyway.
It's in its simplest form. I don't know if it was a book I read or it was a piece at a conference, but you guys are probably all familiar with Peter Drucker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a question about, and it's kind of loosely to what you're talking about leadership for Peter.
Right.
What's the most important thing a leader can do? Decide who does what, right? So it kind of ties into that loosely.
Yeah.
I don't remember where I saw that, but I was always a big fan of his.
Yeah, no, his stuff is really interesting.
Yeah, I think, Herbert, I think you're right in saying that the priorities have to come from the strategy and have that alignment, because that helps you make choices, how to allocate resources and people and all of that. And Tim, I think what you were describing was sort of a bottom-up strategic planning process, which can be effective if people can sort of compete to push their projects forward. But as you said, what happens a lot of times is you just end up adding more projects as opposed to really reprioritizing that.
Right. Well, I think what also happens, and this kind of touches on both what Herb said and you said, Susan, which is that when you think of the strategic plan and you think about the strategic goals, and you start to talk about how does this particular project or initiative support that,
right?
That's when you get into the conversation about, because I could say, look, I can tell you 10 ways that this particular project initiative supports the strategic plan. And maybe the next person over can give you the same 10 for his strategic plan or, initiative. So it's just a very interesting way to, to bring that out, to surface some of those things, because it's also, as Paul and I were saying in the beginning, part of this is about trying to get people's alignment and talk about alignment components of things.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
there's a lot of embedded value in there because everyone's talking about the strategic plan. So instead of being told what it is, they're actually working through it. So there's a lot of value there. And then projects 11 through 13 are on their toes. So if you want it, you better get it,
Yeah.
Well, right.
So
or we have these lined up in the runway. So there's also a way to continue to, look at the runway in a particular way.
Yeah.
So one of the fun I'm having right now listening to all this is, imagine if everything you all said came from the same team, right? So let's say that Herb is, the department head, and he says, well, we make decisions based on the strategic plan. And someone else is like, actually, we all sit around and jockey for position and figure out. Do you know what I'm saying? So
Well, I think what Herb said originally, Paul, was that Herb makes the decision.
Yeah. That's also true.
It's kind of funny though, as you mentioned it, Paul, because I had a building consensus is great, but there are times that you kind of have to, maybe saying dictatorial is the wrong way of wording it, but sometimes, this is where I usually get myself in trouble, by the way, so I don't talk that much, but
we're not gonna ratchet out, Herb. You're
hang around today, the time letting people jockey for position, you've lost a lot too. So it's kind of a balance. I think it's that building consensus is always number one, because if you don't do it that way, people are going to be on board. But at some point, you got to move forward too. It's
right. And so what I was attempting to do, and perhaps not very well, is we're all talking about things from our individual perspectives as consultants and whoever else. I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if this were with an intact team and someone said, we make our decisions against our strategic plan, and someone else said, actually, no, we make them by fighting for them. So one of the challenges I'm trying to point out about this process with all of us is that we're getting lots of diverse answers from different independent folks. What I'm trying to imagine, so that y'all can get a sense of what it's like to do this with a team, is what happens if all these really disparate answers came from a group of people that all work together, right? Then you have a moment of, oh, or oh shit, or suddenly a lot of disparity is revealed because people are speaking from their perspective, and it's clear there's not an alignment around how priorities are made. So I don't know if that was helpful, but that is something that struck me.
That's a great point, Paul. I mean, I actually have an example of this. So one of the things we did have a chance to use play is with a higher ed group. It was the provost and a senior team. And we played a portion of the game in one of the retreats. And it was fascinating because the provost is sort of like, we're sitting there and we're just rolling the dice and going to things. And one of the things was around data and getting information on the organization. And he goes, I can't, this is the provost now, I can't get anything out of the organization. There's roadblocks to it. It's really hard to get data and reporting, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the people who works for him, the senior leadership team, right, turns to him and said, no, you just call Susie. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, Susie has all that information. Just call her and she can get that for you in a minute. He's like, what? So of course, I burst out laughing because it was just like sort of the magic moment where this is back to the disconnect, because there actually was a path that the person had or was there, but was not. And this is a senior leadership team that works together all the time. And it's not big, it's like 6 people. So,
Well, I think that's one of the values, that I've seen in what you've all created, is that you're getting people to talk to each other about their perception of how things operate.
Right.
And you're getting that clarity, and you're getting people to explore other resources and other ways of accomplishing things which is powerful in and of itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the provost reaction was almost like somebody had handed him some gold.
I bet.
It's like, I spend days trying to get this information out of the rock over in the corner, and for some reason, Susie's the answer. It's like, gold has
Amazing.
been found.
Amazing. So you all may know that I am the Myers-Briggs J of all J's. And so one of the things that I am blessed with is my ability to say, we should do a time check right now.
Okay.
Because it's in my nicest voice, like, let me put you through to him. So it's 7:10. We know we go till 7:30, and we'd like to make sure we have some time to debrief those of you who were joining us today and also talk about what's next. So I just want to check, Tim, if now would be a good time to do that.
Yeah, I think we can do that, and then just sort of, we have some thoughts around next steps around it. As I was telling Susan, we have a site that talks about play that will be going live very shortly, which is also something we'll send out links to. But yeah, so that's good, Paul. Why don't we do that?
Awesome. So what I'd like to ask for first, in very general terms, is tell me about your experience doing this.
I can go first.
Please.
So it was uncomfortable. No, it was.
Tell me
Just
more.
Mildly uncomfortable, because it asks questions and you have to really think. And so I can imagine, being in a team where you have to, be honest, because that's what we're doing here is, like really kind of
Right.
digging deep, and to be honest like that in a way is therapeutic. So, so it's kind of a safe place to do it, where you can get out there and say what's on your mind, speak your perspective, and you feel good after that. So I think I got a, dopamine hit from the whole thing. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. And then we'll ask about your
David,
mom.
awesome.
Yeah.
I love dopamine.
Thank you, David.
Mhm.
That's the best ever, David. Dopamine hit.
I wanted to keep playing.
Oh, Susan.
I know there's so much more to explore.
Well, and I think, it's hard with this small of a group. I think the more people you have, the more that kind of builds off of each other. And I think, as you said
Correct.
earlier, it's a little challenging for us to play both the role of, business owners and then also think about how this works with our clients.
Correct.
So you're kind of like, you're constantly bouncing both sides of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's, what you've created is just a really powerful way to engage people in that safe setting that you talked about. They get, you sort of get involved with the game, and then you really have to think hard about, how am I going to answer this question, and how am I going to phrase this in a way that gets my point across without maybe hurting other people's feelings or putting too much of me out there until I'm ready to. So I think it's the game, but I also think it's the really powerful, masterful facilitation that both of you do.
Thank you.
Herb, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's certainly a different way of doing it. I like it. I want to, but it's harder to answer without, so take me back to the beginning then. So the psychological safety. So are we, and I know you guys stated this, so are we using a game format to ease into feeling more comfortable, or just take me back to how you introduced this just for 30 seconds. I don't want to.
Of course.
That would help me a little.
Yes. So let's talk about at least two things. The game is a part of a larger process of discovery and recommendation presentation. And the game is really a way to engage folks who work together in a mutual discovery process, so that what can be revealed can be used to either be leveraged because it's working well, or to be addressed because it's holding people back. So the idea of the game is to produce this data that creates this landscape that Tim and I can bring back to the sponsor or the champion, right, to use our language, and say, this is what we found, and here's what we suggest could be done about it. The reason, one of the reasons to use a game-based approach is because we believe that, unlike other devices, like a survey, which is really static and not very synergistic, that a game allows folks to actually share perspectives in real time and go,
Yeah.
like Tim's example, oh shit, Susie's the source for that? Like, so, you know, people have very interesting ahas while they're doing this, which other ways of collecting data don't necessarily have. And because it's a game, it can be very disarming.
Yeah, well, you also have the snowball effect too of one idea,
Exactly.
Going and building that momentum. So
exactly.
I
Does
mean,
that help to answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think
Awesome.
I think it does what you set out to do. I'm not going to jump right in and I mean, I haven't worked in a larger company in a while. I'm not going to jump right in and say, you know, this would have solved the world's problem, but
if we had that, Herb, we wouldn't be talking to you right now.
Yeah.
No, come on, you would. No,
no, you'd be in the mix. Don't get me wrong, Herb. You'd be in the mix, but we'd be out there solving the world.
I'd be like an honorable mention. You know, I'd be in the room waiting for Susan to let me in, and she'd be like, "Guys, what do you think that I?"
Herb, you will definitely be on a slide with your picture. Okay, I'm just saying you.
But no, this definitely goes in the right direction of doing that. And I certainly can see how it could be helpful in getting people closer to that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Making
sort
an
of
assumption, because
interesting.
I've never done this before, that the more it's used, the more comfortable people should feel because you get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up a good point. I don't, Paul, did you have another point? Sorry.
What I also want to say, which we didn't say, because we didn't want to reveal like so much of the setup as if we were working with you as an organization, but part of the setup also is around how we keep the results confidential, right? So we don't attach people's names to the findings, right? In some ways, that helps with the quote unquote nervousness or anxiety about really saying what I want to say. Because we're not going to say, well, Herb said this, and then suddenly your desk is clean. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, I've got experience in that area.
Right.
All right.
Right. So right.
Right.
Well, and I think, you know, I like that you said it's disarming, because I think it is, but I'm not a huge learning game kind of person, right? But what I liked about this was, I think you get, as Herb said, a sort of this more integrated, robust dialogue around it that you wouldn't, like if you got people into groups, you said, talk about this and put your list on a flip chart or concept map it, or, you know, you'd get some information, but it would mostly be you know, sort of one dimensional,
Right.
where, as you've talked about, you know, this is multi-dimensional, builds on what comments other people have made. And so I think, you know, every time I see it, I understand it a little bit more, and I start to see more and more applications for, you know, that there's the action learning, there's organizational assessments, there's strategic alignment, there's performance challenges within the organization. Getting people together to play the game and to work through that, I think, is a really powerful tool.
Yeah. Well, and one of the examples that I wanted to give you, and it's kind of to your point, Susan, because as Paul and I continue to talk to people about this and people come towards us, or we, you know, have potential opportunities. So one of the opportunities that came towards us was a very large insurance company. I won't name names, but a very, very large insurance company out of the Midwest. Basically wanted to buy, or didn't want to buy. They bought a technology company in New York City to solve what they thought was the problem at hand, which is, how do we get technology that we can use with the millennials? So they were used to basically having their agents, you know, sort of the traditional agent goes out, talks to you about your, you know, various things within both, you know, managing wealth and or sort of insurance instruments, et cetera, and they realized that for the audience, the millennials wanted more control over that process, and the only way to really do that sort of economically would have to have a technology play. So they tried it out with their giant bag of cash, which they have a lot of, by the way, and they said, we want to buy your company. And so they bought this New York City technology company. So think of the two cultures. New York City technology company, younger group, and then old line insurance company from the Midwest. Okay, so I don't think any of you would be surprised by some of what I'm about to tell you. So what happened was that their internal organizational development people and innovation people were like, there are now basically like virtual knife fights in the hallways of the organization. Because really what came down to is they did a shitty job at integrating. They didn't think about it that way. They just thought we'll be one and done. The technology wasn't really working how they thought it would be. The cultures clashed. There was, people vying for positions. There's a lot of stuff. And so what the people inside the company thought or saw this as was a way to surface those disconnects, those conversations. Maybe we need to restart some of this integration piece, right? What isn't going right about the technology that's in our way of achieving that end goal? And one of the things that they didn't have a problem is that they had so much resource that some of their incentive to sort of move things forward in a particular way were not necessarily there, but they saw this as a great device to take their senior leadership through that process. And they also saw it as something that if that kind of worked at some, and over time started to sort of shift the dynamic, that they would actually use this as a device in the organization to make organizational innovation change. So within multiple departments, within multiple groups. So for us, obviously, it's incredibly exciting, but it's back to when Susan saw this at the conference, what did she see? And what did she see as an opportunity? We go and have one meeting with the people at this big insurance company, and they say, wow, this is how we could use it. And that's exciting to sort of watch, because I think what happens is more as you talk about them, the layers, as you were describing, Susan, people start to actually think, oh, now that you say that, I could really think about this. I had showed it to a private equity person, a managing partner of a big private equity firm in Boston. And she said, oh my God, I could use this in the due diligence process. Like, had I thought about this being a tool for due diligence? But she felt like what they could do is they're looking at their prospective investments, is that the senior team could play the game and go through the process. So it would reveal what within the senior team, do they work well together? How do they sort of talk about things? Do they have alignment? Do they have vision? What are some of the things that you might want to be able to surface, et cetera, helped the investment firm to understand kind of what they're buying into, which I thought was fascinating. Like, it's, if you'd said this, I was like, wow, that's brilliant. Actually, it's really brilliant. So I just think that's part of what's interesting for Paul and I, is to sort of see how people think about it and try and can apply it. So.
Yeah, I had two other thoughts as you were talking. One is possibly using it for leadership development program, developing a program.
Yep.
So kind of working with the client to say, okay, so what are the challenges? What's the lore? How are decisions, so really using it to help you understand who the client is, so that you're developing a very tailored program for them. And then the other was modifying it for more individual or personal development. So if you're doing executive coaching, getting a group of people together, like a peer advisory group, and walking them through this, so that, your questions obviously would have to be a little bit different.
Right.
But I think to me, it's just a really powerful discovery tool. And so I just think there's so many different applications for it.
So Susan, that's fascinating. I'm curious about something, this idea about coaching. So It almost sounds to me like you're suggesting it could be used as a way to do a pre-coaching 360 with a peer advisory group and say, or is that not where you were going? Maybe I'm missing the point.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe 360. Maybe it's, I mean, it could be sort of that peer discovery. It could be individual discovery that then is sort of shared with the peer group.
Got it.
Feedback. Yeah, I mean, and again, it just sort of popped in my head. It's not fully formed, so you
no
can probably
worries.
take it and run with it.
I do like what you said though, Paul, because you're essentially priming the pump before a 360, where you kind of get out, you know, everyone like get out those perceptions and misperceptions, so that you go into it honesty with a clear head. So you're like I said, priming the pump before that. It could be fun.
Right. Cool. So gang, we just have a few minutes. Thank you, first of all, for being so engaged.
Yes, thank you.
We really appreciate your willingness to play, and also for giving us your take on it after we played. So Tim, just a few things that you want to share about what's next, right?
Yeah. So I think that what we talked about is, you know, a couple of things. We have a document. Well, one, I guess before I even go to that, and I think we're already kind of doing this real time, which is to sort of say, if anything resonates for you guys, or there's places that you see that you could apply, even if it's, you know, topic sentence wise, which is kind of like what you were just saying, Susan, you know, for the leadership program development or for a personal development coaching piece of it. So, because that's, you know, I think that there are a lot of applications. I had someone who's in a school system in Pittsburgh that saw this actually as a tool for the teachers, which I thought was really interesting. And it was a combination of, you know, both their peers and also within the student population, and understanding, you know, sort of, again, what's kind of in the way, what are the things that we have to apply, et cetera. So I continue to be fascinated by that. So that's very cool. We have, as I said, we have about to launch the site. So that would be something we'll send you the link to. And basically, you know, would love if you have responses to it, or, you know, a pass it on sort of thing. That would be great. Another part is we have this document which articulates a little bit deeper in some of the play pieces. We didn't want to go and, you know, sort of throw the tome at you first. As opposed to, because it's also easier to understand what we're talking about as you've gone through the actual exercise. Susan, not, you know, basically the prop you saw at the conference, the document you saw, which kind of articulates the product more. And obviously you know, as Paul said, the thank you from me, from Paul, and just obviously, you know, the stuff that we're doing in the affiliate network, you know, the affiliate partner group is really interesting, and I'm finding it very compelling, actually. So hope this is something that is helpful or interesting, or makes you know why we're part of it, or maybe why you want to ask us to leave it. I'm not sure which one. Chief Tim, thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thank you and good night. Yeah.
I thank you both for taking the time to share this with us. And I know that, you know, there were many partners who couldn't make it tonight who are very excited to see the recording because they want to learn more about it. And I think, you know, as we continue to grow the network and learn more about each other, you know, I think this is a really important way to do it, is to have everybody sort of share something that's really important to them, or something that they've produced, and get feedback, and, you know, help us learn about how we can help promote you, where we might be able to bring you into different client engagements. And I think, you know, again, I thank you all for your time. I thank everybody for being here tonight, and we'll get this downloaded and put up on our YouTube site. It'll be up as unlisted until you've had a chance to review it. And then as soon as you're ready for it to go public, we'll go ahead and do that. So,
okay. Cool. All right. Well,
closing comment.
Next time you'll see my face again, as opposed to just my hands.
Yes, the role of the board was played by
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'd like to thank the board for all of their hard work and energy. Okay, gang. Well, thanks so much.
Thank
you
great
so
seeing you
much.
all as usual, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.
Right.
Take
Bye
care.
bye. Thank
Bye.
you
Bye.
again.